Marina Tsvetaeva, the poet and time. I love art, but not contemporary art. This is said not only by Philistines, but sometimes by major artists, though invariably when speaking of some other art than their own. For example, a painter speaking of music. In his own sphere, a major artist is always contemporary. Why? We shall see later. Not to like a work is, in the first and most important place, not to recognise it, not to find the precognized in it. The first cause of not accepting a work is not being prepared for it. It's a long time before simple folk in the city will eat our food, like children not wanting to try anything new. A physical turning away of the head. I see nothing in this picture, therefore I don't wish to look at it. But in order to see, one needs to look. In order to really see, one needs to look really closely. Disappointment of an eye that is used to seeing at first glance, which means used to seeing along its old track that of others' eyes. Used to not an act of cognition, but recognition. The tiredness, which is the backwardness of the old, the pre-established attitude of the Philistine, the chock-fullness of head and whole being of the painter who doesn't like contemporary poetry, chock-full with things of his own. In all three cases, it is a fear of effort, forgivable until they judge. The only case worthy of respect, the only legitimate non-acceptance of a work is non-acceptance of it in full knowledge. Yes, I know it. Yes, I read it. Yes, I acknowledge it. But I prefer, say, Tuyachev, who, for I want my own blood and thought, is more akin to me. Everyone is free to choose his favourites, or rather, no one is free to choose his favourites. I'd be glad, say, to love my own age more than the preceding one. Yet I can't. I can't, and I'm not obliged to. No one is obliged to love, but every non-loving person is obliged to know, first, what it is he doesn't love, and second, why he doesn't love it. Let's take the most extreme of extreme cases, an artist's non-acceptance of his own work. My own time may be repulsive to me. I may be repulsive to myself insofar as I am it. Even, this does happen, someone else's work of another age may be more desirable to me than my own, not by a sign of power, but by a sign of kinship. Someone else's child may be dearer to a mother than her own, which takes after its father, that is, after its age. But I'm doomed to my own child, the child of the age. I cannot give birth to another, much as I'd like to. Fate. I cannot love our age more than the preceding one, but neither can I create any age but my own. You can't create what's been created, and you can only create forward. It's given to us to choose our children. It isn't given to us to choose our children, the given or the assigned. I love poetry, but not contemporary poetry. Like every assertion, this too has its counter-assertion, which goes, I love poetry, but only contemporary poetry. Let's start with the least curious, most frequent case, that same Philistine, and end with the most curious, the major poet. Down with Pushkin is the son's answering shout to the father's. Down with Mayakovsky. The son yelling less against Pushkin than against his father. Down with Pushkin is the first cigarette smoked in the sight of the father who has given up smoking, and smoked not so much to please oneself as to spite him. It's of the order of family quarrels which end in peace. Neither father nor son really cares either about Mayakovsky or about Pushkin. Shouts of warring generations. A second author of the Philistine's shout, Down with Pushkin, is the worst of all authors, fashion. We won't dwell on this authoress. Fear of being left behind, endorsement of one's sheep-like nature. What can be asked of the Philistine if even writers, the tail end of writers, are subject to this sheepishness? Every modernity has two tails, one of restorers and one of innovators, each as bad as the other. But a shout, not from a Philistine, but from the major writer, 18 years old at the time, Mayakovsky. Down with Shakespeare. Self-preservation of creativity. Sometimes, so as not to die, one has to kill, primarily something in oneself. Thus Mayakovsky against Pushkin. Not really his enemy, but his ally, the most contemporary poet of his time, as much the creator of his epoch as Mayakovsky is of his, and only an enemy because he's been cast in iron and loaded onto the generations. Poets fear statues and anthologies after your death still more than in your lifetime. A shout that is not against Pushkin, but against his statue. Self-preservation which ends, and did end, once the creator, the fighter, grew mighty. The wonderful poem about meeting Lermontov, for instance, product of his mature years. But except for the exceptional example of Mayakovsky, the assertion, I love poetry but not contemporary poetry, and its converse, I love poetry but only contemporary poetry, are worthy of each other, worth little, worth nothing. No lover of poetry, apart from Mayakovsky's innate self-defence, will say such things. No real lover of poetry will hack off yesterday's and always actuality in favour of today's. No real lover will even remember that the word actual has any meaning other than genuine. In art, it has no other meaning. No one will commit upon art, upon nature, the politician's sin of setting up a pole of dissension on a ground of unity. Anyone who loves only something loves nothing. Pushkin and Mayakovsky would have made friends. They did make friends, essentially never separated. Valleys fight, peaks unite. There's room for everyone under the sun. Peaks know this best of all, and solitary walkers, and the opinion of the rest who've fallen behind or got tired or are afraid of falling behind. The opinion and preference of those who don't know doesn't concern us once it's ascertained, and doesn't concern art even before it's ascertained. An inscription on one of the frontier posts of the contemporary age, "In the future there'll be no frontiers," has already come true in art. It came true at the very beginning. A universal work is one which, translated into another language and another age, translated into the language of another age, least of all then, loses nothing. Having given everything to its own age and land, it gives everything once again to all lands and all ages. Having revealed its own place and age up to the furthest bounds, it boundlessly reveals all that is not place, not age, for all ages. There is no non-contemporary art which doesn't reveal its time. There is restoration, which is not art, and there are solitary individuals who leap out of their time for as far as, say, 100 years ahead. Note well, never backwards. That is, once again, who are contemporaries, even though not of their own time. That is, they are not extratemporal. Genius? Whose name do we say when we think of the Renaissance? Da Vinci. A genius gives his name to the epoch. So much is he it, even if it is not fully conscious of the fact. We simply say the age of Goethe, conveying both the historical and the geographical age, and even the astral map of that moment. In the days of Goethe, meaning when the stars stood in a certain way, or something really definite, the Lisbon earthquake, meaning when Goethe first doubted the benevolence of the deity. That earthquake was immortalised and outweighed by the 7-year-old Goethe's doubt. A genius gives his name to the epoch, so much is it he, even if he is not fully conscious of the fact, or allegedly not, for Da Vinci, Goethe, Pushkin were aware. Even in textbooks we read Goethe and his time. That is a collective noun plus all that's collected in it. A genius has a perfect right to say of his time what Louis, with no right, said of the state. Le temps, c'est moi. Or a whole pleiad might say, mon temps, c'est nous. That is about the genius who outstrips. As for those who are said to come 1 or 3 centuries late, I'll mention just one case. The poet Hölderlin, ancient in theme and sources and even vocabulary, thus arriving in his 18th century, not 1 but 18 centuries late. Hölderlin, who is only now beginning to be read in Germany, more than a century later, who's been adopted, that is, by our far from ancient age. Someone who was 18 centuries late in his own century has turned up as a contemporary of the 20th century. What may this miracle signify? It signifies that in art there is no coming late. That art itself, whatever has nourished it, and whatever it has sought, to restore is in itself a movement forward. That in art there is no going back, unstopping, therefore unreturning. Not no turning, but no returning. Don't watch how the walker turns his head. Look at the milestones he has swung past. It's possible to walk with tight shut eyes with a blind man's stick, or without any stick. Your feet will take you by themselves, though you're mentally thrice 9 kingdoms away. He looked back, but walked ahead. Is Tuyetchev the only one, and Leskov dropping into our generation instead of his own? But this way we can reach Yesenin, who arrived in his country only 10 years late. Had he been born 10 years earlier, people would have sung him. They'd have had the time, him, and not Demyan. It is he who is the index of the literature of the age, not Demyan, who may be an indicator of something or other, but certainly not of poetry. Yesenin, who perished because he couldn't fulfill our time's command because of a feeling very close to conscience, in between envy and conscience, perished for nothing because he did fulfill it, even its civic command of the multitudes to the one. I am the last poet of the village. Every contemporality in the present is a coexistence of times. It is ends and beginnings. It is a living knot which has only to be cut. Every contemporality is a suburb. The whole Russian contemporality is, at the moment, one sheer unbroken spiritual suburb, with villages that aren't villages and towns that aren't towns. A place in time in which Yesenin, who remained after all between the village and town, was even biographically in place. I could name dozens of non-contemporary poets who are prospering to this day, but they have either stopped being poets or never were. They've been forsaken not by their sense of their time, which perhaps they never had in its naked form, but by the gift through which they sensed, revealed, created the time. Not to go onwards in verse, as in everything, means to go backwards, that is, to leave the scene. What happens to the Philistine after the age of 30 has happened to the trump card of émigré literature. He has become contemporary with the preceding generation, which means in his case with his own 30 years ago authorship, he has fallen behind, not from other walkers, but from the walker he himself ought to be. The reason X doesn't accept contemporary art is that he no longer creates it. X is uncontemporary, not because he doesn't accept the contemporary age, but because he has stopped on his creative path, the one thing a creator has no right to do. The only people who are not contemporary, besides those neutral persons who aren't contemporary with any time, are those who are no longer in the ranks, invalided soldiers, a title of honour since it presupposes validity in the past. Even this challenge of my own to the time, for I bypassed the age at my birth. Your demand is in vain, to no purpose. Time is king for a day. I bypass you. Is a shout of the time, using my lips, its counter-shout to itself. Were I living 100 years ago, when rivers flowed smoothly? Contemporality of a poet means doomedness to time, doomed to being driven by it. You can't jump out of history. Had Yesenin realised this, he'd calmly have sung not just of his village, but also of the tree above his cabin, and no axes could have chopped that tree out of 20th century poetry. A poet's contemporality is not a declaration that his time is the best, and not even a simple acceptance of it. No is an answer to. Nor is it even the vital need to give some answer to or other to events. The poet is himself an event of his time, and every answer of his to this self-event, every self-answer, will be at once an answer to everything. A poet's contemporality is so little a matter of content. What did you mean in this work? What I did in it, that it once befell me, the writer of these lines, to hear with my own ears, after a reading of my poem, The Swain. Is this about the revolution? To say the listener simply hadn't understood is to fail to understand oneself, for it's not about the revolution, but is it the footstep? I'll say more. That a work's contemporality, in Russia's case, its revolutionariness, not merely doesn't reside in the content, but is sometimes there despite the content, as if jesting with it. Thus, even in Moscow 1920, audiences kept asking me for the poem about the Red Officer, namely, "And so my heart is gnashing over the RSFSR, whether fed or not, as if I myself were an officer in the death days of October." In poems there is something more important than their meaning, their sound. And the soldiers of Moscow 1920 were not mistaken. Those lines, in essence, are far more about a red officer or even soldier than about a white one who would not have accepted them, who did not accept them. I know this from the cheerful, trustful feeling that I had when I recited them there, flung them to my enemies as if to my kin, and from the feeling of shyness and awkwardness I have when I recite them here, something like, "Forgive me in the name of Christ." Forgive you what? Well, the fact that I write about you like this, write about you in the wrong way, in their way, the way that belongs over there. I celebrate you in the language of the enemy, my language, and altogether forgive me in the name of Christ for being a poet. For if I were to write in such a way that you would not forgive me for myself, but instead recognize yourselves in me, I would not be what I am, a poet. Once when I was reading my Swan's Encampment to a quite inappropriate audience, one of those present said, "None of this matters. You're a revolutionary poet all the same. You've got our tempo." In Russia they forgave me everything because I was a poet. Here they forgive me for being a poet. I know too that the true listeners to my white Perikop are not the white officers to whom each time I recite to them I really sincerely wish I were reading something in prose, but the red soldiers whom Perikop would get through to and will get through to, even including the priest's prayer before the attack. If only no politicians stood between poet and people. Also, despite my isolation, my Russian works, by their will, not mine, are designed for multitudes. Over here, as a physical fact, there are no multitudes, only groups. Just as instead of the arenas and terraces of Russia, there are little salons, instead of the ethical event of a public performance, though it be an assault. There are literary evenings instead of the irreplaceable anonymous listener in Russia. There's a listener with a name, even with a distinguished one. All this belongs to literature, not to the current of life. The wrong scale, the wrong response. In Russia, as in the steppes and on the sea, there is room to speak from and into, if they'd let people speak. The whole thing is simple. Over here is that Russia. Over there is all Russia. To people here, in art, it's the past that's contemporary. Russia, not the authorities, Russia, the land of those who are in the lead, requires of art that it should lead. The emigration, land of those who have remained behind, requires that art should remain behind too, which means roll uncontrollably backwards. In the order of things here, I am a disorder of things. There I wouldn't be published, but I would be read. Here I'm published and not read. Incidentally, they've stopped publishing me now as well. The chief thing in a writer's life, its second half, is writing. Not to get ahead, but get it said. Over here, I'm not hindered from writing, doubly not hindered, for it isn't only persecution that hinders, fame, love does too. Everything is point of view. In Russia, I'll be understood better, but in the next world, I'll be understood even better than in Russia. Understood completely. I'll be taught to understand myself completely. Russia is merely the limit of earthly understandability. Beyond the limit of earthly understandability in Russia is unlimited understandability in the not earthly. There is a land which is God, Russia borders with it, said Rilke, who himself yearned for Russia all his life, everywhere outside Russia. With that land which is God, Russia borders to this day, a natural frontier which politicians can't displace, since it isn't churches that mark it out. Not only now, after all that has come to pass, but always Russia has been the other world to everything that is not Russia. Whether with white bears or with Bolsheviks makes no difference. Other, something like a threat of salvation of souls through the perdition of bodies. And it was not much easier then to take the decision to go there with all the pre-war blandishments than it is now for all the prohibitions. Russia was never a country on the earthly map, and those who went there from here really went over the frontier of the visible. It's on that Russia that poets stake their bets, on Russia entire, Russia of all time. But even Russia isn't enough. Every poet is essentially an émigré, even in Russia. Émigré from the kingdom of heaven and from the earthly paradise of nature. Upon the poet, upon all who belong to art, but most especially upon the poet, there's a particular mark of discomfort by which you'll know him even in his own home. An émigré from immortality in time, a non-returner to his own heaven. Take the most various of them, line them up in your mind, whose face shows presentness. All of them are over there. Kinship with soil or people, nationality, race, class, and that contemporality which they create, all this is only surface, the first or the seventh layer of skin, which the poet does nothing but try his utmost to shed. What time is it? They asked him here, and he answered the curious, it's eternity, Mandelstam on Batyushkov. And what millennium is it, my dears out there? Boris Pasternak on himself. All poets of all times say essentially one thing only, and that one thing remains on the surface of the world's skin in the same way as the visible world itself remains on the surface of the poet's skin. Next to that emigration, what is ours? And long she languished upon earth, filled with a strange desire, and could not replace the songs of heaven with the tedious songs of earth, no less tedious for being one's own. Coming back to here, in matters of art, the Philistine is generally contemporary with the preceding generation. That is, artistically, he is his own father and his grandfather and great-grandfather too. In matters of art, the Philistine leaves the ranks at around the age of 30. As soon as he's 30, he starts rolling uncontrollably backwards through non-understanding of others' youth, to non-recognition of his own youth, to non-acknowledgement of any youth, till he gets to Pushkin, whose eternal youth he transforms into eternal oldness, and whose eternal contemporality he transforms into antiqueness from the word go, at which point he dies. It's to be noted there is not one ordinary old man who doesn't contrast Pasternak, whom he doesn't know, with Derzhavin, whom he doesn't know either. Pushkin, not merely a great knower of his own time, but also the first to defend the authenticity of the lay of the host of Igor, then newly discovered, is the limit of the Philistine's knowledge in any direction, whether looking round or looking back. All ignorance, feebleness and goblinry goes rushing invariably under the shelter of Pushkin, who had knowledge, power, leadership. Two movements that meet each other, age moving forward in time and the corresponding awareness of art moving backward, increasing age and decreasing artistic perceptivity. Thus, to this day, older people in the emigration consider their 70-year-old coeval, Beaumont, almost as a 20-year-old, still fighting him or forgiving him as they would a grandson. Others, a bit younger, are still or already contemporaries of that Igor Severyanin of their own youth, that is. Recently there was an Igor Severyanin evening which the emigration attended in order to look at themselves of those days, to look with their own eyes at their own youth and listen to how youth used to sing in those days. But youth, sage fellow, had grown up and stopped singing, or sang just once with a grin at us, at itself. A third group finally are beginning to discover, permit the possibility of, Pasternak, who has been Russia's best poet now for 15 years, 1917, My Sister Life, and printed for more than 20. Those who know and love Pasternak, that is to say his real contemporaries, are not people of his age, around 40 years old, but their children, who will drop behind in their turn one day, get tired and get stuck at that very point. At him, if they don't roll backwards to somewhere beyond Block, or even further back into the land of their fathers, forgetting that in its time it too was a land of sons. Meanwhile, somewhere dressed in the protective colouring of non-fame, someone wanders amongst us who is the man of the future, already in being, someone who would be, oh, so much loved by his 20-year-old coevals, if only they knew. But they don't know him, but he doesn't yet know himself. For the moment, to himself, he is still the last of all persons. He is known about only by the gods, and by his empty notebook with the mark of his 2 elbows going right the way through it. No one is given the chance of knowing Boris Pasternak at 20. From all that's been said, it is clear that a poet's contemporality is by no means signalled by the timeliness of his general recognition, thus not by the quantity but by the quality of this recognition. General recognition of a poet may even be posthumous, but contemporality, effect on the quality of his time, always happens in his lifetime. For in matters of creativity, only quality counts. On n'y peut rien pour attendre. Pasternak, for one, lost nothing. But perhaps if that Russian suicide had got caught in some Pasternakian downpour, if he'd been artistically capable of perceiving, of surviving it, he wouldn't have thrown himself off the Arc de Triomphe in answer to my love, my death, my sister life. We should ask those who went off to war with a volume of Pasternak and Bloch in their pockets. Contemporary Russia, which is almost forcibly and certainly untiringly and unswervingly accustoming the Philistine to the new art by both the visual and the oral method, has displaced and dislodged all this. Even if not all of them understand, even if they don't understand it all at once, it's enough that they're looking for the cause of this non-understanding in themselves, instead of in the writer. Why is it, Vladimir Vladimirovich, the worker's question to Mayakovsky, that when you read we understand everything, but when we read, learn to read, lads, learn to read. Russia is a land where for the first time people are learning to read the poets who, however much it's asserted, are not nightingales. The contemporality of the poet consists in so many heartbeats per second, given the exact pulse rate of the age, including its illnesses. It consists in an extra semantic, almost physical consonance of the heart of the epoch, which includes my heart and beats in mine as mine. I may fall behind in ideas and life. I do fall behind. I defend what's gone, what's remained beyond the edge of the earth. But my poems, without my knowledge or will, carry me out to the front lines. One can't order from God either poems or children. It's they who order fathers. So when in Moscow 1920 I first heard that I was an innovator, I was not only not pleased, I was indignant. The very sound of the word was repugnant. And it is only now, 10 years later, after 10 years of emigration, after considering who and what were those who thought like me in the old life, and especially who and what are those who accuse me in the new, that I've resolved at last to face up to my newness and adopt it. Poems are our children. Our children are older than us because they have longer and further to live. Older than us from the future, therefore sometimes foreign to us. To return to the content and a detail of it, its direction. Lunacharsky, because he is a revolutionary, didn't become a revolutionary poet. I, because I am not, did not become a restoratory poet. Poet of revolution, le chantre de la révolution, and revolutionary poet not the same thing. Only once did they merge in Mayakovsky, and merged all the more because the revolutionary in him was also a poet, wherefore he is a miracle of our days, the apogee of their harmony. But counter-miracles take place too. Chateaubriand, who was not with the revolution but against it, paved the way for the revolution of romanticism in literature, something that would never have happened had the revolution set him to writing political pamphlets. N.B. There are pamphlets of genius, Mayakovsky's, full of all the lyrical power he suppressed in himself. Secondly, and this is the main thing, acknowledge, bypass or reject the revolution. All the same, it's in you and has been since the beginning of time as the elemental, as well as since 1918 in Russia, which, like it or not, did happen. In a poet, all the old could be left by the revolution, just as it was, all except scale and tempo. And the old Sologob with the bergeries of his dying hours, precisely the old Sologob, poignant as a human document, an old poet in a time of revolution, exacerbating as an image, an old man who has lost everything, and now look. But that isn't what art is, bergeries, and bergeries are not what Sologob is. In his bergeries the dark flood of his gift lets him off, lets him down on some Arcadian shore. Kuzmin was old too, yet in his Byzantine St. George there sounds the step of the revolution. A foreigner listening would say it's about a fight. That is the revolutionary quality I'm talking about. There is no other for a poet, or else, apart from the single miracle of Mayakovsky, there is no poet. Pasternak is revolutionary not because he wrote the year 1905, but because he discovered a new poetic consciousness and its inevitable consequence, form. It's telling that among its contemporary, those important at the time, the year 5 found no singer, while among the poets important at the time, it found no contemporary. There is only one year 5, Pasternak's, 20 or more years later. The conclusion from this is that an event like a poet or a poem may sometimes not merely lose nothing by waiting, but may actually benefit from it. For events and for those who try to hasten them, a great creative lesson in patience. There is not a single important Russian poet of the present whose voice hasn't shaken and grown since the revolution. The theme of revolution is the command of the time. The theme of celebration of the revolution is the command of the party. Does a political party, even the most powerful, even the one with the biggest future in all the world, represent the whole of its time? And can it present its command in the name of the whole of it? Yesenin perished because he took a command that was meant not for him but for others, command of the time to society. As a command to himself, the time to the poet took one of the commands to be the whole command. Yesenin perished because he let others know for him. He forgot that he himself was a conducting wire, the most direct of all. A political command to a poet of whatever kind has got the wrong address on it. Lugging a poet around the Turk Sib is asking the wrong person. Official reports by poets are unconvincing. Dragging a poet along after politics is unproductive. Wherefore, a political command to a poet is not a command of the time, which issues its commands without intermediaries. A command not of contemporality, but of the evils of the day. To the evils of yesterday we owe the death of Yesenin. Yesenin perished because he forgot that he himself was just as much an intermediary, herald and leader of the time. He himself was at least as much his time as those he allowed to deflect and destroy him in the name of and behalf of the time. A writer, if he only is a wave and the ocean is Russia, cannot but be roused to wrath when the elements are roused. Had the ideologues of proletarian poetry respected poets more and instructed them less, they'd have let those roused elements rouse the poet themselves. Let the poet be roused by them in his own way. Had the ideologues of proletarian poetry respected poets more and instructed them less, they would have pondered the following quatrain. A writer, if he only is the nerve of a great nation, cannot but be defeated when freedom is defeated. That is the very nerve of creativity. Do not write against us, for you are a force. This is the one legitimate command any government can issue to a poet. And if you say to me, in the name of the future, well, I receive commands from the future without intermediaries. What is all that pressure of church, state, society compared with this pressure from within? I too have commands from the time, apart from the martial tempo of the Tsar maiden, the swain on a red steed and much else. Apart, that is, from the time's oblique influence, there is the time's direct command, right down to the names of the leaders, but not issued by leaders or counter-leaders, issued by the phenomenon itself. Thus my poem Pericop was ordered by the Pericop bastion. If some white ideologue had ordered it from me or even just proposed it to me, nothing at all would have come of it, for a third person would have been interfering in a matter of love, invariably destructive, whatever his name, and murderous when there is no name, when the third person is a political program. What's more, if my Pericop has succeeded, it is only thanks to my writing it without being hampered by anyone's mercenary gratification. In the complete absence of any sympathy, writing it here in the emigration, in exactly the same conditions as I would have written it in Russia, as one against all, even against my own heroes, who don't understand my language. In the double estrangement of that cause perdu, the volunteer movement, and that cause perdu, the poem about it. Any group sympathy, party sympathy, mercenary sympathy is ruin. There is only one sympathy, the people's, but that comes later. The time's command to me is my tribute to the time. If every creation, that is every incarnation, is a tribute paid to the human essence, then this is a specially big tribute to the essence, and as such a specially big sin before God. The only salvation for me and my works is that in my case, the demand of the time has turned out to be the command of conscience, a thing of eternity, of conscience concerning all those who were killed in the purity of their hearts and who have not been sung and are not going to be sung, and the supremacy in my works of the command of conscience over the demand of the time has its guarantee in the supremacy in them of love over hatred. Contrary to all counter-revolutionary Moscow and the emigration, I never hated the Reds as much as I loved the Whites. The badness of the time is, I think, partly redeemed by this love. Those who in Soviet Russia are called, or modestly call themselves, fellow travellers, are actually the leaders, creators not only of language, but of the visions of their time. Not even in Gogol's immortal Russia Troika do I see the poet as trace horse, not fellow travelling, but lonely co-creating. And the poet will best serve his time when he lets it speak, express itself through him. The poet will best serve his time when he quite forgets about it, when it is quite forgotten. Contemporary is not what shouts the loudest, but sometimes what keeps the quietest. Contemporality is not the whole of my time. The contemporary is what is indicative of the time, what will be judged by, not its demand, but its display. Contemporality is in itself a selection. The genuinely contemporary is what is eternal in time, thus not only what is indicative of a given time, but what is timely forever, contemporary with everything. Pushkin's poem To the Sea, for example, with the shades of Napoleon and Byron on the eternal background of the ocean. Contemporality in art is the influence of the best upon the best, the converse of the topical, influence of worst upon worst. Tomorrow's newspaper is already out of date, from which it is clear that the majority of those accused of being contemporary do not deserve this accusation, for their only sin is temporariness, a concept as opposite to contemporariness as is extra-temporariness. Contemporality, omnitemporality. Which of us will turn out to be our contemporary? Something only the future will establish, and only the past will have proved. A contemporary, always the minority. Contemporality is not the whole of my time, but neither is the whole of contemporality one of its phenomena. The age of Goethe is simultaneously the age of Napoleon and the age of Beethoven. Contemporality is the aggregate of the best. Even if we can see that communism, as an attempt at the best organisation of earthly life, is a good, is it alone in being a good? Is it alone all goods? Does it include in itself, define through itself, all other goods and powers of art, science, religion, thought? Include, exclude, or on equal terms coexist? On behalf of all the other goods, I stand up for the latter, as one of the movers of contemporality, and precisely as an organiser of earthly life which had been getting more and more disorganised. It deserves an honoured place, but just as earthly organisation is no more all-important than spiritual, just as the science of communal life is no more all-important than a feat of solitude, so even communism, organiser of earthly life, is no more all-important than all the movers of the spiritual life, which is neither a superstructure nor an annex. The earth is not everything, and even if it were everything, this organising of human communal living is not the whole earth. The earth is worth more and deserves more, an honoured place, as to everything which knows its honour and its place. I come to the question I find hardest of all, whether Rilke is indicative of our time, this man who is distant among the distant, lofty among the lofty, lonely among the lonely. If, and of this there can be no doubt, Mayakovsky is indicative of our time. Rilke is neither a command to our time nor a display of it. He is its counterweight. Wars, slaughters, churned up flesh of dissension, and Rilke. Because of Rilke, the earth will be absolved of our time. As its antithesis, necessity, antidote, Rilke could only have been born in our time. In this lies his contemporality. The time did not order him, but summoned him. The command of the multitudes to Mayakovsky, say us. The command of the multitudes to Rilke, tell us. Both commands were fulfilled. Nobody will call Mayakovsky a teacher of life, or Rilke an orator of the masses. Rilke is as indispensable to our time as a priest on a battlefield, to pray for the one side and for the other, for them and for us, for the illumination of the still living and the absolution of the fallen. To be a contemporary is to create one's time, not to reflect it, or to reflect it only not like a mirror, but like a shield. To be a contemporary is to create one's time. That is, to do battle with 9/10 of what's in it, as you do battle with 9/10 of a first draft. We remove the scum from the cabbage soup. Shan't we remove it from the boiling cauldron of time? Gumilyov's, I am polite to contemporary life, but there's a barrier between us, refers of course to those who with elbows and hooters prevented him from thinking, to the time's noises, not to those who together with him were creating the time's silence, of which Pasternak wrote so marvellously, silence, you're the best of all I've ever heard. To the time's favourites and day labourers, not to his, Gumilyov's, contemporaries. Now, having cleared my conscience of all omissions, having taken on myself the most difficult task of establishing the fact of time, having acknowledged my dependence upon time, my boundness to it and boundedness by it, having acknowledged my dependence upon time as my tool of production, as my part-time and how often private employer, I finally ask, who is my time, that as well as all this I should willingly serve it? And altogether, what is time that it should be served? My time will have passed tomorrow, as his passed yesterday, as yours will have passed the day after tomorrow, as every time always passes, until time itself will have passed. A poet's service to the time which does occur, is a service that bypasses his will. It is the fated, I cannot, but it is my fault in God's sight, though a merit in the sight of the age. A poet's marriage to his time is a forced marriage, a marriage of which, as of any suffered violence, he is ashamed, and from which he tries to tear loose. Poets of the past tear into the past those of the present into the future, as if time were less time for not being my own. All Soviet poetry is a stake on the future. Solely Mayakovsky, this zealot of his own conscience, this convict of the present day, came to love this present day, overcame, that is, the poet in himself. The poet's marriage to the time is a forced marriage, consequently an unreliable one. In the best case, bon mine au mauvais jour. In the worst case, continual and actual. It's one infidelity after another with always the same lover, the one under a multiplicity of names. However much you feed a wolf, it always looks to the forest. We are all wolves of the dense forest of eternity. There is no marriage? Yes, there is marriage, the same as the wedlock of a convict to his fetters. But when we have thrust upon us not only a marriage with time in general, with the concept of time, but also marriage with our own time, this time, marriage with some kind of sub-time, and most important, when this violence is forced on us as a love, when this hard labour is described as service according to our vocation, when we are fettered spiritually as well, violence endured is weakness. Spiritual legitimation of violence endured is a thing without name, of which no slave is capable. To defend against time what is eternal in time, or to eternalize what is temporary in it, however it's put. To time, the age of this world, another age is counterposed. Service to time, as such, is service to change, betrayal, death. You can't keep up with it. You can't oblige it. The present, is there such a thing? Service to the recurring decimal figure. I think I am still serving the present, but I'm already serving the past and already the future. Where is it, the presence, and in what? You may run with someone running, but once you realise that he is running nowhere, always running because he's running in order to run, that his running is an end in itself, or still worse, a running away from himself as a wound, a rent into which everything flows away. Let's go together as far as the first turning is at best a bad travelling companion, leading us all into all the taverns, involving us in all the brawls, deflecting us from even the most modest of our purposes, and in the final analysis, which comes very, very soon, abandoning us with an empty purse and head, if we haven't outstripped and abandoned him. Service to one's time is a command of despair. To the atheist, only the age's present moment exists. Only this measure of weight, the converse and kindred face of seize the moment. For after this, you're done for. The kingdom of earth from despair of the kingdom of heaven. To the atheist, there's nothing left but the earth and its organisation. Progress? But up to what point? If till the very end of our planet, forward movement towards the pit, forward movement not towards an end that is attainment, but towards an end that is annulment. And if ever they teach the planet not to end, win the planet from non-being, then one generation of earthly gods after another generation of earthly gods. an end or an endlessness of earthly life, equally dreadful because equally empty. Lermontov's "if for a time, then it's not worth the trouble" refers not to love, but to time itself. Time itself is not worth the trouble. Death and time reign upon earth. Do not call them masters. Everything whirls and goes into the dark, immutable. Only the sun of love. Afterword. After I'd set down the last full stop after "of love," I read in the newspaper that very evening, "In Moscow, one discussion has ended and another is beginning. The attention of the writing public is now transferred to the poetry front." Asayev, friend and follower of Mayakovsky, gave a talk on poetry. Then a debate began which lasted 3 days. The sensation of the debate was an appearance by Pasternak. First, Pasternak said, "There are some things that have not been destroyed by the revolution." Then he added, "Time exists for man, not man for time." Boris Pasternak over there, and I over here, across all the spaces and prohibitions, external and internal, Boris Pasternak is with the revolution. I am with nobody. Pasternak and I, not consulting each other, are thinking of the same thing and saying the same thing. This is contemporality.